Last year, at the beginning of the pandemic, I lost three people close to me, the three people who form my support system. Losing one would have been unimaginable. Losing three was devastating. I'd moved to a new city. I didn't know many people, and the support system I usually relied on to get me through a time like this was suddenly gone. Added to that were state imposed social distancing requirements, and I was alone. I sought comfort in a handful of friends and family, but quite quickly realized the limitations. That despite their best intentions, no matter what they said or did, it couldn't magically transport me out of my numbness and paralyzing emptiness. Any relief I felt while in their virtual company was temporary and evaporated as soon as I was back in my world, back to my reality. I knew I had to get through this myself. There was no silver bullet. And I had to put in the work, and the only way out was through. Today, I'd like to share with you how I engineered my happiness after the most devastating period in my life, and how you can too. Happiness is just one end of the spectrum, though. On the other end is depression, but there's also the in between where we find ourselves most of the time, what organizational psychologist Adam Grant recently termed languishing. So, to understand how to engineer your happiness is to understand how to survive the state of depression if you're ever in it, and how to thrive through languishing. Phase one was coping. In Mumbai, I volunteered at a suicide prevention helpline. For 4 years, I answered calls from people who found themselves in positions where I now found myself. And when I was lost, which for the first half of last year was more often than not, I imagined what a conversation with me, the suicide prevention volunteer, would look like. And it boiled down to two things. One, recovery takes time. I recalled once speaking with a person who had lost her mother, the only loved one in her life, and a loss which left her completely alone. In the initial months, she was devastated. She didn't know how to go about living without the support she had known all her life. But as time went on, she got to a better place. She eventually called in less and less often, and eventually she didn't need our support. Tough times don't last, tough people do. Time heals all wounds. It gets worse before it gets better. There are multiple sayings for the same message. Recovery takes time. If you're in a rut, it's going to suck a lot before it eventually gets better. But if you're able to ride the storm, if you're able to persevere, you are setting yourself up for future success. Martin Seligman, in his book Flourish, quotes a study which found that when people go through adverse events, they display more intense strengths and higher levels of well being than people who have sailed through life. So, what doesn't kill you doesn't just make you stronger, it also makes you happier. Because think about it, if you've been through a terrible life altering situation, you don't bother about the usual minor stresses in life. You don't sweat the small stuff. Also, studies by Daniel Gilbert, the happiness expert, found that in responding to challenging life events, we do better than we anticipate. We may believe that we'll never love again, that we'll never trust again, or we'll never laugh again, but we do. The second key to coping is to express your feelings. As much as we'd like to, we can't escape our feelings. And this comes from someone who, after watching the 1973 Exorcist movie as a kid, logicked her way into not being afraid. I convinced myself that I wasn't all that good, that I had done some bad things, and that Satan should be pleased with me and should have no reason to want to come after me. I was 11. But as much as I would love to program my emotions, I knew that I had to find an outlet for them. Between 2013 and 2017, based on anonymized data gathered at our helpline, the biggest reason for suicidal tendencies was loneliness. And this was pre COVID. It's not that people were physically alone. Rather, despite being surrounded by loved ones, the feelings of loneliness arose because of the inability to express and unburden oneself openly and freely without the fear of being misunderstood or judged. As volunteers, the single biggest skill we were trained in was listening. Because as people, we all want to be heard, to be understood. A mind in turmoil is like a washing machine with thoughts tumbling around like clothes. Just as it's impossible to sort out clothes in a washing machine, it's impossible to sort out thoughts when your mind is in turmoil, make sense of the state you're in, why you're there, where you're going, without being able to offload your thoughts or emotions. It's like trying to solve a multivariate polynomial nested differential equation, not on paper, but in your head. It's not hard to imagine how something like that would cause your mind to explode. So if you're unable to confide in friends or family, find another outlet, a therapist, a helpline, or even journaling. As simple as it sounds, journaling is a highly effective tool. It helped me sort through my conflicting emotions of sadness and the guilt of wanting to feel better when I thought I shouldn't. Through journaling, I got an avenue to express myself and be vulnerable without the fear of being judged or misunderstood. Once I got to a place where the day to day didn't feel like monumental tasks, but became a part of everyday life, I went about engineering my change. I was no longer in the clutches of depression, but I was just existing. And who wants to just exist? So the problem I solved for was one we all search for: how to find happiness. So I set about my quest the only way I knew how, like an engineer would: troubleshoot what went wrong, analyze why it happened, correct the behaviors that caused it to happen, and create a feedback loop so that you're constantly optimizing the outcome. Planning has always been second nature to me. As a kid, I'd save money, and my aunt once asked why I needed to do that when my dad, a successful surgeon, was starting his own hospital. To me, the answer was obvious. What if the hospital fails? At 12, I wasn't just planning my future, I was creating contingency plans. Last year, I didn't just lose people from my life. I lost my sense of identity and my future. Because as people, we're not just living in the present, we are constantly building our futures. So when we lose a person, we aren't just grieving the loss of a relationship, we're also grieving the milestones we expected to celebrate together, the family we thought we would have, and all the experiences and memories we thought we would share and create. Subconsciously, I had been defining myself by my relationships. So when I lost those relationships, I lost my sense of identity and future, and no contingency plan could have prepared me for it. I was so used to planning out so much of my life. And even though there were roadblocks and detours along the way, I eventually always got to my destination. This time, though, my destination was erased off the map. I was lost and had to find my way out with no compass. So this is how I fixed my problem. I troubleshooted that I'd lost my sense of identity and my future. Upon analyzing, I realized it was because I reserved a lot of my happiness for the future. And don't we all fall into this trap? We put happiness on a pedestal like a long-term goal to be achieved. And when we achieve a goal, then what? We set the next goal and the next. We keep pushing happiness further and further away, and we're forever playing catch up. Correcting this, as you can imagine, was the hardest part: finding happiness in the now. As much as I wanted to be happy, it eluded me. And then one day, something magical happened. I was turning 30 in the middle of the pandemic when shelter in place was in full swing. Then, more than ever, I needed a big celebration. But it was a simple gift from my brother that turned things around. The gift itself wasn't unique, it was a collage of video messages. But what it represented was way more powerful: that there was someone in my life who put in the effort to make me happy. And we all have that someone or some people like that in our lives, but we very often overlook what they do for us because it may not be exactly what we're looking for or exactly what we expect at that point of time. But in that moment, something magical happened. I realized I didn't have to find happiness, I just needed to choose it. For the longest time, I thought that if I planned well enough, I could control my life and determine the outcomes. Last year changed that. But in choosing to be happy, I reclaimed some of that control. Viktor Frankl, the Austrian psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor, famously wrote, "Between stimulus and response, there is space. And in that space is our power to choose our response." The choice of being happy is one we all can make. We just have to want it enough. Confirmation bias is a powerful thing. We're all subconsciously looking for validation of our frame of mind. So if we're in a terrible mood, anything can set us off. But if we are in a great mood, it's harder for things to bring us down. So here's what I did to choose happiness every day and what you can do too. One, understand what's in your control. Research shows that this is one of the top traits of resilient people. Last year, I decided I had to start working out again and lose some of the weight I'd gained over time. I'd lost weight successfully in the past, so I knew I could do it again. Exercising gave me back that sense of control in a world of chaos. It was a closed-loop system where I knew that if I put in the work, I would get guaranteed results. When I felt like a failure, wins like these really helped me gain back my self-confidence. But don't confuse this as a lack of ambition. You can have both. Have the ambition, but also drop the expectation that things will turn out exactly as you plan. And remember to focus on what's in your control. 2, find happiness and gratitude in the present. For most of us, our unhappiness stems from events in the past or anticipated events in the future. We carry with us the memories of unpleasant experiences, or we worry about how we are going to respond to an event that hasn't yet happened. But the great thing about the present is that there are so many opportunities to find happiness and practice gratitude. Being present helps us relish in the dozens of micro successes every day rather than reserve happiness for the future. Like Richard Branson, follow the old maxim: live for the present, and the future will look after itself. Third, change your frame of reference. It's said that in every adversity is the seed of an equal or greater opportunity. I didn't understand what this meant until I applied it to myself. Social isolation when you're a fully functioning person is hard. Social isolation when you're at rock bottom is terrifying because you don't have any distractions to prevent you from confronting your reality. But it can also be a gift. For me, it was a yogic retreat where I got to focus on my mental health and well-being and not feel pressured to be social or perfect. When faced with a challenging situation that's outside your control, do your best to look for a way to make the most of it. Look for an opportunity to grow. As humans, we are given the gift of creativity. Use that creativity to change your frame of reference. So these were my 3 lessons. Focus on the things in my control, find happiness and gratitude in the present, and change my frame of reference. Training the mind is like training any other part of the body in the gym. The more often you do something, the easier it gets until it becomes second nature. Positivity can be inherent, but can also be learned through resilience training. And neural connections that at one point were thought to be fixed are now revealed to be changed and adapting in a newly evolving science known as neuroplasticity. People are successfully retraining their behaviors and actions with the help of cognitive behavioral therapy. So what does this mean? That if you choose to be happy, you'll be happy 100% of the time? Not really, but you'll get close. Which brings me to the third phase, finding a new normal. This summer, I lost 2 more people close to me. And all of a sudden, the intense feelings of grief and loss came rushing back. But this time was different. I had read and researched enough in the last 1.5 years to know that even though I felt like I was starting all over again, that the progress I'd made wasn't for nothing. The feelings were a natural consequence of a traumatic event being triggered to feel like you're teleported back in time to the last time you felt that way. And as much as I will myself to be happy, as much as I will myself to choose happiness, it didn't quite work like that. I couldn't just skip past coping right to healing. But having gone through it once, I knew what to expect, and I got through it at a much faster pace. It's not that I miss the people from my life any less. It's just that I choose to focus on the happy moments rather than the loss, which is outside my control. If the last 2 years have taught me anything, it's this: shit happens. Don't take things for granted. Don't take relationships for granted. Don't take careers for granted. Don't take your life for granted. Don't wait for an existential crisis in your mid-40s to start asking yourself if you're happy with your life choices. Have a crisis every year, I know I do, or every couple of years. Reassess where you are in your personal and professional journey. And if the trajectory doesn't look right to you, change it. Don't be okay with complacency. Adversities don't define you. How you respond to adversity defines you. Be stubborn, not in refusing to change, but in refusing to let life define your journey. My story was one of loss and perseverance in the pursuit of happiness, but you can't have change without loss. So embrace loss, learn from it, grow, and don't just live, thrive, and choose to be happy. Thank you.